So Shuhei finally comes out and has his first interview, and in doing so, pretty much talks about everything Sony, how they treated him, how he felt he was pushed out, and of course, the problems that are happening at Sony, and where they're going, and why he feels he was demoted. But ultimately, with the two new cancelled games coming into the picture, it's no surprise that this is coming on the back of Concord, which was a 400 million colossal failure. Now, 400 million may not be a lot to some companies, but for a company like Sony, it is a lot of money and it's going to leave a dent. And clearly the decisions now to rethink and refocus, as you know, Mike was saying, clearly stems from this. But the problem is, what is going to happen to those studios that were building these first party games that have now had 2 years, 3 years, 4 years scrapped? I mean, we've seen the likes of Factions, which had, what, 3-4 years scrapped, and they had to pretty much start from beginning on their new franchise or their new game. You know, this is all delaying games that are supposed to be coming for PlayStation, and now PlayStation is in a position where if they don't rely on Microsoft's generosity, they could be in very serious trouble. So now they are looking at hand-me-outs from Microsoft and trying to money hat anything they can in order to bolster their year, because 2025 could be the driest year yet for PlayStation. And all of this because of Concord and the arrogance of a few who clearly decided that they know what the consumer wants better than what the consumer wants, designed a game that pretty much was rotten from its core. Even though the foundation was pretty decent, the core of it, the mechanics, the actual balancing was so off, it was unbelievable. And now things are starting to shape up quite drastically. And if we're looking at the stuff that's actually been cancelled, it's pretty insane. But first, let's have the drop. So if you watched my video last night, you'll have seen that this tweet featured again, but this is just a colossal number of cancellations that they've had. And don't get me wrong, it's not like Xbox hasn't had any cancellations, but when Xbox had a cancellation for Odyssey, which no one knew anything about outside of a survival MMO, everyone lost their minds and was criticizing Xbox of being the worst company in the world. Then they, in 2013, they cancelled Scalebound. And even when Platinum came out and said, we are responsible, we did not create a game that was good enough, we are the ones to be, where the fingers should be pointed at, and we would like a second chance, the PlayStation community didn't want to listen. All they were seeing was Xbox bad. But when you look at the scale of how many games have been cancelled, Spider-Man multiplayer, which, looked really good. It had playable content, was cancelled. You had the Factions, which was 4 years. Neil Druckmann quoted saying, this is the best Last of Us he's ever worked on and ever played. Cancelled. The less I say about Concord, the better. God of War live service, I mean, who even asks for that? Ben Studios, this is the one I'm genuinely concerned about, because they've been working on Ragnarok for the last 2 years of the game's launch, and then they started working from 2022 on this new multiplayer game, and now they have nothing, literally nothing to show for the last 2 years. Now, obviously, this isn't a fault of theirs, and I really hope Sony isn't going to take it out on them, because they were put in this position with the mandate for live service. So hopefully the staff there won't pay the price with layoffs, because if they do, this wholly falls down onto Herman Hulst. Now, I know people are trying to use Jim Ryan as a scapegoat, and that is astronomically awful, because Jim Ryan was never the creative guy. He was the business guy. He left all of that stuff to Herman Hulst. And why people aren't holding Herman Hulst responsible for this, accountable for this, is out of this world. It blows my mind. Fire Sprite also cancelled Twisted Metal. I think they've actually closed the studio entirely. The London Studios co-op game, but the studio closed, so it won't be the game. Deviation Games multiplayer, cancelled. And of course, there was a Destiny spin-off from Bungie called Payback, which everyone assumed was going to be Destiny 3, which has also been cancelled. So there's been there's a lot of work that went in here, and there's quite easily around $1 billion worth of money just gone down the drain, and that's gotta hurt. And I'm talking minimum here. So it's crazy when PlayStation fans turn around and say, oh, it's okay, there's no problems, when there actually is problems. Because now, with all of this being cancelled, and a lot of this was scheduled for the next year or 2 years, these studios now have to start from scratch. The average game development cycle is about 7 to 10 years. Maybe they can squeeze it into 6 years, maybe if it's a small game, 5 years. But that means it's not landing this generation of the console. These are PS6 games going forward now. That's the point we're at right now. So it's kind of crazy, what's happening here, and I really hope the studios don't pay for it. But you've got like this over here, the PSVR 2, which was a flop. I mean, we all agree it was a flop. I bought one day one. It's just got no support. And when questioned to Shuhei, he turned around and said, let's move on. He didn't want to answer or talk about it because it was just, it just didn't work. And despite the fact that the PlayStation fans want to cope that it really wasn't. Instead of actually turning around and telling Sony to focus some effort onto a £500 device, instead they decided to follow the gravy train and say, everything's okay, hail Sony. It's become like a cult with these people. Then you've got this one over here, which, I mean, I knew it didn't do as well as the original because it just wasn't as good as the original. I wouldn't say it's half as good. Burning Shores was amazing. That was akin to the original. That was great. Zero Dawn was a fantastic game. But Forbidden West missed on so many different points. So many. And Burning Shores, I think, actually saved it. But it's clear that there's been problems here. And now, Shuhei's turned around and said that the money that they make from these games just aren't enough. If they don't do remasters, well, the whole purpose of going into the live service was to provide extra funding, provide that microtransaction funding, because once you've got the game built and the upfront cost is done, it's all about maintaining and keeping that live service going. But the microtransactions that are coming in is supposed to be what pretty much brings in the riches. Unless you're Bungie, and then no matter what you do, you're going to be making a loss. But that's clearly not worked out here. And Shuhei says the reason why we do, or Sony was doing, remasters and remakes is because they're dirt cheap and they're able to sell it off at full price. Not only is it like a double-edged win because it brings in new people, but people are buying it anyway and they're happy to do it. But he's saying that because of the rising cost of single-player games, if you want to actually see those games, you kind of have to start buying these remasters and remakes that we're doing. Stop questioning them, just buy them, or we have to release on other platforms like we're doing with PC with a much sooner cadence, basically hinting at day and date. That is what he was saying, and it's inevitable at this point if they are dropping the whole live service. We've seen Spider-Man 2 already selling 11 million copies, which was astounding, to be fair. 11 million copies is nothing to scoff at. But Helldivers 2, which was day one on PC, has proven that if a good game gets released on PC, despite the fact that I do not like Helldivers at all, it's not my cup of tea, I just didn't enjoy it. I don't know what it was, it just wasn't for me. But it shows that PC can carry games that Sony released. And let's face it, PC did carry Helldivers 2. And it was more successful and sold more copies than Spider-Man 2. But Spider-Man 2 at 11 million copies isn't even known if it broke even. That's the scary part here. Because of that crazy Marvel contract that they had to sell 7.2 or 7.4 million digital copies. But as we know, PlayStation fans keep saying, no one buys digital for PlayStation, right? So clearly that 7.2 is out the window. And as Square Enix's financial advisor unveiled in a long post on how these games are actually priced and why companies no longer want to go physical, Sony doesn't take 100% of the earnings when it sells on physical. The shopkeepers take about 15-20%, then you've got the manufacturing cost to press everything, which is roughly another 5-10%, so they're already losing 25-30% just there on its own. And then let's not factor in all the amount that they're losing on second-hand deals, right? Second-hand selling, which is even worse. And then there's sales, which they're losing even more on Spider-Man because it's gone on sale multiple times. And then, of course, during those sales, Marvel is taking still their cut. On bundled copies of the console, Marvel was taking 50% of the purchase price. So they were taking £35 of that £70 game. So it's unclear if 11 million copies even did break even for them. But what we do know is on the back of all of this, 3 DLCs were cancelled that were planned for Spider-Man 2, and they fast-tracked the PC version to release this month. So what Shuhei is actually saying here is actually backed up with logical facts. You know, the fact is, these games cost a lot of money to make now. It wasn't like the previous generations where you'd get 3 Gears of War games in one generation. Now you'll be lucky to get 1 game for the generation, let alone 2. And, you know, sometimes it might even miss the generation and go to the next one because games are taking too long to manufacture. So something needs to be done there, reined in, and, you know, Sean Layden was covering this, and he's right. Games need to, you know, things need to be done to look at them. But then, of course, you got Nibs over here, who's coming out with all this information. But I just decided to go in and just look at one of them, which was Ratchet & Clank, right? And the value that he's put down for Ratchet & Clank is basically Sony taking 100% of the revenue. And that's not the case, right? Because that's only if they sell it digitally. They did not sell it fully digitally. So when we're looking at down here with the picture that he's showing, this 112 million, that is 1.6 million units at $70. They're not getting all that money. They're not getting all that money. Sure, they may have been overall profitable because the cost of the game may have been less than that amount. I don't know how much the game actually costs to build, but what I'm saying is this number here is not the true reflection of how much they are getting. And so what Nibs is showing here is very, very misleading and very disingenuous of him, because he knows that shopkeepers actually take a cut. Manufacturing takes a cut of that purchase price. It's not, you know, Sony doesn't get the physical price of all of that in. And then if we're talking about games like Miles Morales, where Marvel are taking a nice chunk of that money as well, they're not getting 427 million, they're probably getting half of that, if not less. But again, it's still a profit, I get it, but the numbers shown are disingenuous. But one thing is for certain, with Shuhei coming out with all of this information and this interview, it's sure to have rustled some feathers at Sony. It's sure to have pissed off some people at Sony, because they did not want their dirty laundry going all out and about. And the reality is, it has. Now I know I see a number of people going, oh, but Sony still won the Game of the Year with Astrobot, which only sold 1.5 million copies. And yes, it probably did make a profit. Congratulations. But that doesn't underline the other effects that the company is undergoing. And the reality is, Shuhei did, in my opinion, more damage than Sony would have liked. And now you're seeing Sony's reaction to this, where they're going into these studios and saying, right, if you're doing a live service game, we want to talk with you. And now they're pulling reins back and cancelling projects midway through. And at the end of the day, you have to ask, where is the accountability? Where is the responsibility? You know, the decision to make these games came from high up. It wasn't Jim Ryan. Jim Ryan may have suggested that we do this, but the creative director was always Herman Hulst. He was the one that made the decisions on what creative direction that they would go. Why is no one holding Herman Hulst responsible for this? Why is he getting a free pass? If this was Microsoft and you had this many cancellations in such a short window with this much amount of money gone down the drain, the media would have been having a field day. Why is the media not having a field day? Why is the media not really reporting on this? Why am I not seeing 100 news articles like you would do if this was an Xbox cancellation? When Odyssey cancelled, IGN, everyone was writing articles about the colossalness and all this and all that. It was everywhere for about a week or two. Odyssey this. I still see people talking about Odyssey. Right? I still to this day see people talking about Odyssey, of what it could have been. You don't even know what the hell it is, you moron. I mean, these people are literally talking about a game that they've never ever seen, just a concept art, and they think they know. I mean, for all you know, the game could have been an absolute complete trash pit. And sometimes these games are a trash pit, and it's unfortunate. But Sony's knee-jerk reaction to this clearly is on the back of Concord, and the reality is, it's not all sunshine and rainbows now within Sony. But with Shuhei coming out and exposing Sony, some may call this really unprofessional from him. I guess he had a lot of pent-up anger after the way he was demoted and, you know, placed into the indie field because he didn't agree with the company line, which now, as it ironically turns out, is now changing back to the way that he believed it was, how it should be originally, and that is focusing on single-player games. But again, if you're focusing on single-player games, this means that you need that revenue from somewhere else because you're not getting it from microtransactions, and that is what live service games are all about, that cash cow of microtransactions. And if that's not happening, this only ends and breeds one thing. And as Nick Marseille says over here, Sony's single-player games going day one to PC soon just got a lot more obvious, because that's how they're going to bolster their, you know, revenue. Because they need a new revenue stream. As Shuhei said, if they're moving away from live service, remakes and remasters are going to start being a lot more prevalent, and releasing on other platforms is now a necessity rather than a luxury. Maybe they will not release on the other consoles, but releasing on PC day one is becoming more and more an inevitability. And this isn't something bad. In my opinion, Sony did say that they do not fear PC. They do not fear the PC market. They do not believe that the PC market will encroach them in any way, shape or form. So by saying this, they are saying that if their games released day one on PC, it would not affect their console sales, their console performance, or anything else related to their sales. So now, Sony, is the time to put your money where your mouth is. Release your games day one. You are the one saying that it won't affect it. And with your live service scheme going out the window entirely at this point, you need a new revenue stream, and PC is there for the taking. So let's see how that works out. Let's see if your fear of PC is true, or if it's all just a bunch of chit-chat for you to say, we don't fear PC, but in reality, you're tucked away underneath your bed, quivering like a little baby. Time will tell, but I think day and date for PC, as Nick says here himself, is inevitable. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. Let's have that discussion, and I will see you in the next one. As always, like Post Up says, try to tell you, remain legend.